you get these powers anyway?
I don't know.
Oh, shit. Many of the more interesting themes in movies that I like revolve around the future, our future, and all the deeply profound questions that arise when considering the future. Is it even possible to tell the future beyond if I touch a hot pan, I'll get burned again? And how about this? Can we change the future? If we know what's going to happen, is there anything that we can do to prevent it? For example, if I knew a week ago to stay off of Twitter, and that way I could avoid accidentally seeing the video of the guy at the gas station sticking the gas pump in his. Was it my fate to see that video? Does fate even exist? As you probably know, belief in fate or determinism varies widely amongst different religions, cultures, philosophies. Now, I'm about to make some references to some religious beliefs. I am not a scholar, so let's keep this nice and vague. From what I understand, in Christianity and Islam, there is a divine plan for us all. In Christianity, it's sometimes referred to as predestination, or the concept that God has already determined the fate of each person, including their salvation or damnation. In Islam, it's believed that Allah has a divine plan for all Muslims called Qadar, or divine decree. It's a little different because each human has free will, but the choices that people make are part of Allah's plan. On the other hand, it seems that Hinduism and Buddhism place more control of our own fates in our hands. We've all heard of karma, I hope. In Hinduism, from my understanding, your actions in a previous life determine your fate in the current life. This concept is called dharma, or translated means righteous duty. Buddhism believes in a similar concept of karma, but emphasizes the potential for enlightenment through one's efforts, implying that while past karma influences your fate, it can be altered through present actions. In Greek mythology, there were the Fates, three goddesses that controlled the destinies of mortals and gods alike. One of the Fates spun the thread of life. The second Fate measured it, and the third Fate cut it, thus determining an individual's fate. In philosophy, determinism is the belief that all of our fates are determined by preceding causes. On the other hand, there is a philosophical approach called fatalism, which believes there's nothing we can do to determine our own fate. And since there's nothing that we can actively do to determine our fate, those who believe in fatalism seem to be able to accept occurrences a little bit easier because everything's out of their control. And even if you could predict the future, what responsibility do we have to do something about it? And this gets even deeper because if you knew something bad was going to happen in the future, you have to start considering things like your ethical, legal, or even personal considerations. But what if you could tell the future and do something about it? Would you want that power? Would you want that responsibility? This is the main theme of today's movie. It's a movie about a man named John Smith. No, really, that was his name in the movie. A man who was trapped in a coma for years. And when he woke up, he found out that he had been given a gift or a curse. Today, we're entering the Dead Zone. The Dead Zone is part science fiction film and part psychological thriller. It was directed by David Cronenberg and based off the novel of the same name written by Stephen King. It came out in 1983, and some of the bigger actors you'd recognize are, of course, Christopher Walken in the main role, Tom Skerritt, who plays the sheriff, and Martin Sheen, who plays yet another senator trying to be president. The story focuses on John or Johnny Smith, who's played by Christopher Walken. who's a mild-mannered teacher in the town of Castle Rock, Maine, which is the setting for a lot of Stephen King's writings. He has, or I guess had, a serious girlfriend named Sarah, and they seem to be living a very content life together. However, on the way home one night, Johnny's in a horrific car accident, which leaves him in a coma for 5 years. After those 5 years, when Johnny wakes up, he realizes that his whole world has completely changed. Unfortunately, Sarah has moved on. She's now married to some other guy. Because for her, it's been 5 years. For Johnny, Christopher Walken, it's only been like 5 minutes. And honestly, Johnny never really recovers from losing Sarah. In addition to that terrible news, Johnny also discovers that he has a new power, that when he makes contact with someone, he can read their past, present, or future. Of course, this is a lot to happen to one person. So, in addition to adjusting to his new abilities and the new reality around him, he also has significant physical damage stemming from the wreck and his 5-year coma. Thankfully, his doctor is a kind person and helps him through his physical recovery, but also dealing with his new ability. At one point during his stay in the hospital, Johnny accidentally uses his powers in order to save his nurse's daughter, who happened to be in a burning building, their house, and was able to warn her before it was too late. This leads to additional and very public fear and intrigue from the people around him. Johnny is quickly learning that his psychic powers are a gift and a curse, which is a recurring theme, and not only causes psychological trauma, but also has a negative physical effect on his body. But soon, Johnny's powers attract the attention of law enforcement. See, in Castle Rock, there's a serial killer going around, and the police are unable to solve this mystery of who's doing these murders. So the town sheriff, played by Tom Skerritt, seeks out Johnny's powers to see if he can help solve these crimes. Long story short, Johnny eventually agrees to use his powers to help the police, and fairly quickly finds out that the murderer is actually one of the deputies, spoiler alert, and they're able to apprehend this person. Well, technically, he kind of apprehends himself. I can't say YouTube. This situation where Johnny's powers are able to help law enforcement demonstrates the potential for his abilities, but it also shows Johnny that he is paying a physical toll every time he uses his powers. So Johnny goes into hiding and does some tutoring on the side to pay the bills. But while he's in hiding, through a series of events, he eventually meets Greg Stillson, played by Martin Sheen. How best to describe Stillson? He's ambitious, he's unethical, unscrupulous, he's pretty evil, and he's running for US Senate, which is the perfect job for him. However, during one of Stillson's political rallies, Johnny accidentally makes contact with his hand. What happens next is Johnny experiences a vision of a terrifying future where Stillson is apparently president of the United States, launching a nuclear attack on Russia and thereby initiating a nuclear apocalypse. And here's where we get to what I was talking about earlier. What is Johnny willing to do in order to stop this from happening? Is it Johnny's responsibility? Johnny decides, yes, he will do something about it, and I suppose thankfully so. So his vision compels him to take drastic action in order to stop Stillson from achieving his own destiny. For the final third of the movie, Johnny is just obsessed with stopping Stillson. Johnny devises a plan to... Can I say that word? Johnny devises a plan to end Stillson's political career by force. Armed with a rifle, Johnny sets up in a position overlooking the event. When Johnny finally takes his shot, he misses. However, Stillson, hearing the gunshot, grabs like a baby and picks up the baby to shield himself from the would-be shooter. And even though Johnny's plan to end Stillson failed, a photographer was able to capture the instant where Stillson was holding up the baby to shield himself, thus ruining his political career. In the confrontation, Johnny is mortally wounded by Stillson's bodyguards, and as he's laying on the ground dying, his old flame, Sarah, who happens to work for the campaign, comes down to check on him. He makes contact, and he sees a very pleasant future for Sarah and her family. This gives Johnny a sense of peace and comfort, and he dies there on the floor, knowing his mission was accomplished. The Dead Zone is not an entirely complex movie, but it is one of my favorites to watch. It explores themes like fate and free will, but also the moral implications of using one's special abilities. Johnny's journey throughout the film really spotlights the burden of knowing the future and then the additional burden of doing something about it. The film has elements of horror and sci-fi and even political intrigue and drama, which makes it a very entertaining movie to watch. When The Dead Zone released in 1983, it received positive reviews but wasn't a box office blockbuster. People seem to really like the thing that I like, and that's Christopher Walken's performance as Johnny Smith. Personally, I'm not a big fan of Stephen King's novels, and the films that are made based on his work are hit and miss at best. I'm not really a fan of him as a person either. And this comment hits a little too close to home, but I find his novels to be bloated and lacking focus. And bear with me here, and I mean no offense by this, but Stephen King seems to have an unhealthy fixation and very low opinion of anyone with religious faith, specifically Christianity. In several of the books I've read and some of the movies that I've seen in the Stephen King universe, the main antagonist, or sometimes even like the minor antagonist, will have strong, stereotypical, Bible-thumping, conservative Christian beliefs. Ridiculously stereotypical. Typically, their portrayal as a Christian or a conservative is so over the top, it's really cringy and mind-numbing. To be fair, it is no secret that Stephen King has a very leftist ideology, but who doesn't in Hollywood? However, and I'm trying to be fair here, I feel that it really brings down the quality of his books, and in the films, it really sticks out like a sore thumb. In The Dead Zone, it's really his mother that plays this stereotypical role. She makes comments about Johnny's new powers as being blessings from God or a curse from God. And thankfully, it's not really overdone in Cronenberg's film, but when I start hearing it, my eyes roll back so quickly. And of course, being a film of the 1980s, Martin Sheen's character is a Reagan clone, right-wing nuclear maniac, and it's just so cringy and overtly over the top and on the nose how he's portrayed. Yeah, because the leftists never started a war. Yeah, right. I suppose most people don't react the same way I do when I see that level of political hackiness in movies, but it really takes me out of the film. Thankfully, The Dead Zone doesn't really beat you too hard over the head with Stephen King's prejudices, so I give it a pass. And while I was looking into the production of The Dead Zone, I found surprisingly little drama behind the scenes, which is shocking to me considering this movie involved David Cronenberg, Christopher Walken, and Stephen King, three notorious weirdos. But I'll share with you two tidbits. Number one, Christopher Walken, who has become legendarily known for his portrayal of Johnny Smith, was not Stephen King's choice for the role. Stephen King wanted, wait for it, Bill Murray. Now, assuming you've seen The Dead Zone and are familiar with Bill Murray's work, you would probably come to the same conclusion that I did and say that that would be a horrible mistake. But that's Stephen King for you. He was a fan of the Colombian snow. And number two, it's become kind of a meme how Christopher Walken reacted when he made contact with someone and had one of his visions.
Nice to meet you.
Well, director David Cronenberg would fire a .357 Magnum loaded with blanks into the air without Christopher Walken knowing, so his reactions of shock would be very authentic. The gunshots would make Christopher Walken's flinches seem more involuntary. And thankfully, or ironically, this was all Christopher Walken's idea. He said, hey, you should shoot a gun so my reactions would seem more authentic. I do this a lot when I read stories about how these movies were made back in the 70s and 80s. It sounds like a human resource nightmare. Christopher Walken's portrayal of Johnny Smith really made The Dead Zone a classic. I don't know if I would call Christopher Walken a great actor, but he's so enjoyable to watch every time he's on screen. I guess you could say he's the best actor to play Christopher Walken roles in cinema. And if you think about it, if it weren't for his portrayal of Johnny Smith, The Dead Zone could have been so much worse. Speaking of which, I think they tried to make a TV series out of The Dead Zone, so you want a worse version? There you go. I mean, it's a movie about a guy that can tell the future by touching your hand, but somehow they pulled it off. The Dead Zone is probably my favorite Stephen King related film. No haunted cars, no haunted pets, no haunted children, just a guy who can tell the future, or the past, or sometimes the present. But we can't tell the future, right? I mean, that's the stuff of science fiction. It seems that nowadays we are getting closer to being able to tell the future than ever before. We have entered the age of machine learning, which I'm sure will have no negative consequences. Advanced AI systems are increasing their accuracy when they're predicting potential outcomes based on a data set that they're given. Their only limitations, as of right now, are the quantity and quality of the data they can process. As our lives become much more online, the quality and quantity of data they have access to will only improve. Advanced algorithms can analyze vast amounts of data to identify patterns, to make predictions about future events, such as consumer behavior, stock market trends, or disease outbreaks. On the other hand, or maybe the same hand, we are just now dipping our toes into the world of quantum mechanics. Within that world of quantum mechanics, there is a theory called the many worlds interpretation. You may be familiar with this one. It's the idea that any potential outcome actually does happen, except it happens in a different universe. So for an infinite number of potential outcomes, you have an infinite number of universes that are created. If the multi-worlds interpretation is true, what that means for us is you're no longer talking about whether if something will happen, but merely the probability that it will happen within our universe. And finally, there's my favorite form of fortune telling, extrasensory perception, or ESP. This is the study of psychic abilities such as telepathy or clairvoyance and supernatural abilities to predict the future. And while some killjoys might call ESP pseudoscientific, some studies now claim to show statistical anomalies that suggest the possibility of precognition. I didn't think this video would go in this direction. I'm not under the influence of any substances besides caffeine, so I'll wrap it up by saying this. And thanks for watching. That was from Ghostbusters 2, by the way.